Welcome as we continue our continuing coverage on racism and trying to advance the cause. Mike Mack sitting in the nice part of my Sports to Max broadcast, joined by Dr. Verna Price in our series of conversations on racism as we try to advance and educate on the cause. Tonight we talk about racism in the workplace. Dr. Price, thank you for joining us as always.
All right. Thank you for having me, Mike, and thanks for co-hosting with me. I sure appreciate it. Yeah. This is a very big topic. And before we even start, we just got word from the newsroom that Emmy and Tony Award actress, who was a shero in her time, Cicely Tyson, just went on and passed on. And so we are going to celebrate her life. And I know that what she would want is for us to continue this conversation. And I believe that Cicely Tyson really spent all of her life really doing the work of eradicating racism, particularly in the industry, entertainment industry, but I think in her own life, in her own world. So just giving honor to her. And as we think about this work, Max, it's a big topic, racism in business and the workplace. So I don't know, what do you think about that? I mean, why is it so important for us, in your own thoughts? You know, you've been in the workplace for a long time. You know, you've been in multiple types of workplaces. You know, why that topic to the workplace? Why is it so important? What are some of your thoughts?
Real simple. Everybody wants to get the job that they deserve. If you earn a job, you believe you should get it. It shouldn't be based on your color of your skin. So if you're the most qualified, and I'm an idealist. I'm not a pessimist or an optimist, and this gives me trouble. I'm an idealist. I want to believe that the person that's best suited for the job gets the job. Now, here's why. If you want the ideal model, look at sports. In sports, a coach can't afford to have anything less than the best players on the field or on the court. And so, therefore, they've already paved the way and shown us there is a method to this. You play the best players. It doesn't matter because the whole goal of our organization and the community is to win games. And winning games means you have to put the best players and get the best coaches aligned. And so I very much find this an interesting concept, and because I cover sports, I've always thought that for sure at the professional level, they're not perfect, but they're a step ahead of the curve because we no longer talk, and take the NBA, National Basketball Association, we no longer talk about there was an African-American coach hired today. We don't talk about that anymore because it's happened so many times that we accept now that the most qualified coach is going to get that job. And I think there's a lesson there for America, particularly as we start to re-engage in these topics because of 2020 and what we've gone through.
Now, I would say, Mike, you know, that sports definitely has kind of broken the plane when it comes to race and race relations in many ways, and has been a forerunner for us in many, many ways. And at the same time, sports in the workplace, you know, is actually we're actually doing a whole segment on racism in sports, right? So we're doing a whole segment of that coming up in April, I think it is. But also, you know, when the assassination of George Floyd happened, many of the athletes in many of the industries started standing up and saying, we have to provide some solidarity around this, and we have to stand up and say something about racism. So absolutely, there is some modeling there, but it's not always perfect. And so there's different stories that come out of that arena as well. But we do know, here's the reality. In the construct of racism, and racism as we talk about it on this show, in the room where it happened, is that racism is this construct put in place where it was to divide people, specifically Black people and white people, into two very different categories, and then to put systemic power around that division of racial prejudice to actually bring home the fact that one set of people would be able to benefit and have privilege and have power in a structure that was designed for that one group of people and not designed for the other group of people, superior, inferior, white people, black people. So within that construct of racism, where racial prejudice then is actually literally driven by the actual systemic laws put in place to uphold racial prejudice, it becomes very, very difficult in the workplace when you're not fitting that space of being in the group that is said to be superior. And so things like affirmative action, why is that needed? Things like we have racial equality, why is that needed in the workplace? Still, it's 2021, and there are still people in 2021, Mike, who literally, because their names are not Sam and, and Elaine and, what I would say maybe some, Margaret or Mary, some more traditional Caucasian white people names, they change their names on so that they can actually get hired. So that their applications will even get looked at. It's amazing to me, right? So there's things that happen. The reality that racism does exist in the work and business world. And then the question, Mike, is like, what are we going to do about that, right? What are we going to do about this construct to get it out of our systems? So like what you're saying, Mike, is absolutely true. That if I'm qualified for the job, doesn't matter what the color of my skin is, because here's what I know, Mike. Here's what I know. There's only one race. It's the human race. I know that, right? And I happen to be cinnamon brown and of African descent, Caribbean African descent. And I don't know what's your ethnic descent?
Scandinavian and German.
You're Scandinavian German, right? So if I look at, if I'm a doctor and I'm doing heart surgery, Mike, guess what? I don't care if you're Scandinavian German. I just want to make sure that I get your heart working. And that same heart
works with me. I don't care what color you are. Can you put the ball in the basket?
Exactly. Put the valve in and make my heart work, right? I don't care what color you are. You're a human. So that is the work that we get to do tonight. And we have an amazing group of business leaders who I'm going to introduce, and we're going to start this conversation. And Mike, wherever you want to jump in, just jump in and we're going to have a good time. Are you ready?
Bring them on.
All right, let's bring them on. I'm going to first introduce Jamie Tates, and Jamie has worked in the area of strategy and culture for 20 years and is the founder of a local strategic consulting firm. And when not working, get this, Jamie keeps busy with her 4 teenage children. Bless you, Jamie. Bless you. Welcome to the room where it happens. Jim Nolan is a 40-year food industry executive who's worked and led large multinational organizations, as well as a small, medium private equity-backed entities. And he lives in Chicago with his wife of 45 years, and they have 4 adult children and 12 grandchildren. Jim, you are a busy, busy man. Thanks so much for coming to the room where it happens.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to welcome Christopher Mullen. Christopher, I've known for quite some time and has been a great supporter of my work and my nonprofit, the Power of People Leadership Institute as well. And Christopher is a financial services professional for more than 20 years and a managing principal in the Twin Cities. And Christopher is married for 25 years and has 3 adult sons. Welcome to the room where it happens, Christopher. Thank you, Dr. Verna. And then I have my longtime friend and colleague, Ms. Kristen Swanson. And I have to tell you that when I first even started talking with WCCO about this project, I said, Kristen, guess what? What do you think of this? And she said, I think it's an awesome idea. Let's just go for it, Dr. Verna, just do it. So Kristen is a 30-plus year beauty and cosmetology industry executive who has served in a variety of global roles and is currently leading a salon and spa based in Minnesota, California, and Arizona. And she resides in Roseville with her husband and son, Kai. Oh, I shouldn't have called his name. Maybe I should have called him Kai. He's awesome. Who who they adopted from China, and he's just a wonderful young man. So welcome to the room where it happens, all of you. I'm just going to throw out our question. The big question is, why are we having this conversation tonight? Why are we having this conversation tonight? And why do you think that this topic in business, racism in business in the workplace, is so important for right now, 2021?
Well, I guess I'll start. I think we're in an awakening right now, and I think it's a good thing. And people are open to having these conversations where in the past maybe they didn't know how. And, you know, I think a lot of us on the call it's standing up and saying, I don't know it. I don't have it all figured out. And I think people are open to that. And so I'm excited that we're having these conversations because it's past due.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. These are important and critical conversations. Well, I've read and I've heard criticisms that the corporate diversity and inclusion programs are not working quite so well, or falling short, or perhaps just failing altogether. So perhaps these programs have not had enough time to make an impact in the corporate culture and the current climate, but we certainly have to continue to strive to make improvements and work towards understanding.
Now, you know, that's so interesting that you talk about the corporate programs, Christopher, because, you know, I came to a place where I would tell people I stopped doing diversity work because I was finding that people were talking about it, and they talked like they wanted to do something about it. But then I would have these conversations with their team members, and there was no walking it out. So there was a total disconnect between here is what it looks like on the strategic plan, and then here's what's going on in the hallways and in the offices and in the culture every day. So when you talk about that, you know, where are we on that diversity work in corporate? I think it's critical. Ms. Kristen, why is this so important?
It's so important today and now in this moment in time, I believe, because, you know, to your point earlier, society has woken up and the world has woken up. It was shaken by the events in our backyard. And I think that in this moment in time, this openness and wanting the change is promising, because in the past, historically, when there have been events, there's been progress, but there hasn't been monumental change that needs to really create momentum. And I believe those events that we watched right here has really, really woken up society. And also I've seen it amongst leaders. And what it's done for leadership is we're all here because we're leaning in and willing to be more vulnerable than ever before on a topic that we're not experts in. And I think that that's really critical for making this work and making progress.
And I think to add to that, in the corporate side, right, I grew up and spent a lot of my time before I started my business in really large corporate. And I think there's such an approach to policy or process our way out of this, when it's not about that. It's about teaching our leaders what it is and what it isn't, how to have conversations like this. We can't write a policy that's going to solve this, right, in a corporate environment, but we don't yet know how to have the right conversations.
You are absolutely right. And since I covered the riots, 6 days that I was out to the front lines, every day I reach out to African Americans because I've been educated in what it is that I thought I knew versus what I really know. The question that I have, and here's where I come back to, is twofold. One is, how do you know if you're making progress? If for corporate America, you know, we have PowerPoints and we have everything that points to we moved up here, revenue was here, all that. How do you know if you're making progress when you don't have a measuring stick? I think that confuses leaders and people in the industry. And the second part that I found to be incredibly true is there are people that don't know what the limits are as to the conversations that they can have with someone of another race. They don't know what they can feel comfortable asking them about stereotypes, about how they grew up. They don't know what's crossing the line and what's the safe haven, and they want to, but they don't know what the rules are yet, and I don't know how A, we measure whether we're doing it well, and B, how we encourage employees to talk to each other and engage in conversation without feeling like you might offend somebody.
That's a big one. That's a big one, Mike. Now it's you talk about kind of in these corporations where all of this seeming progress has happened. So then you have to ask the question, the progress has happened for who? Who has the progress happened for? And then you start looking at what the company looks like and how the company operates and who's getting promotions and who's where. And then it beckons the question, like, what is really going on here? And is there some sort of unspoken language that's happening within your company that has to do something with racism? So, big question. Hey, Jim, welcome back. Welcome back.
Dr. Price, I apologize.
I'm like, come back, Jim. Come
apologize
back.
to all. I just all of a sudden can't explain it, but I had technical problems, so I apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So you tell me why. Why do you think this topic is so important?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and I'm sorry I missed what the other panelists may have said, but to me, running any company, whether it's a large corporation or a small family-run entity, this is all about culture. I'm firmly convinced that cultures of companies have a direct reflection on their performance. And the topic of racism within a culture of a company can be, as we would all know, toxic. So, ensuring that the culture is solid, is strong, is forward-looking, is absolutely critical. And I think that one other thing that I would say relative to that is that lots of companies put together value statements and mission and vision and value statements, etc. But as we all know, it's not only what is said, but it's more important as to what is done. So, no company puts up a value statement of racism as part of our value statement, or diversity, lack of diversity as part of our value statement. They generally say the opposite.
Right.
But it's really, the important part is really looking at what they do to support this and its actions, as opposed to the words that are on pieces of paper. So racism it's there. It takes sometimes very overt forms and sometimes subtle forms, but it does go against a culture, and culture is important to performance.
I'm going to give us some time out here so we can continue this conversation and talk about what is crossing the line. In the room where it happens with Dr. Verna Price and her esteemed panel, conversations on racism that matter. Tonight we're talking about the workplace. Stay with us or join us on Facebook. If you're listening on the radio, you're on News Talk 830 WCCO.
And I think, Mike, we're just going to keep on going here for a minute. They gave us some extra time. I'm so excited. I think they gave us some extra time. Yay. This is good.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I did my traditional break, and you're correct. I'm getting a memo saying, no, we're on until 59. So skip the break that I just took. We're reloading. That was my little teaser, though. Verna, you take it right.
Put those specs on, Mike. Let's keep it rolling. I love it. But you know what, Jim? You're raising such a great point, right? So this whole notion of, yes, you can have all these corporate values, but then if your culture doesn't support it, which is where you get down to the nitty-gritty of how it really works.
That's right.
Then what? So it really leads us into our second big question, and let's answer the first question. Is racism existing in businesses and workplaces today? Big resounding yes. So let's help our viewers kind of think about, well, how does it show up? Because some people will go, well, there's no racism here, Dr. Verna. No, we're all happy here. We're not, no one's mad here. We're all happy. Well, the question is, how does it show up? It is showing up in these subtle ways, and sometimes it's showing up in these very blatant ways. January 6th, There was something going on January 6th with the insurrection in Washington, D.C. There was something happening there. What was happening there? That impacted us. That impacted our nation. That impacted our businesses. That impacted our children. Like, what was going on? Let's talk about it. So how does it show up? How does it show up in businesses as you've seen it in your careers? And you all have, amazing careers.
Dr. Verna, you mentioned something that caught my attention. I think something to the effect of when you leave the diversity and inclusion seminar in that corporate setting and you get back out into the hallways and the cubicles, there's this unconscious bias that exists. So there's the corporate culture, which is striving to improve and striving to communicate the right message. And then there's the personal culture, the family culture, where there may be some bias, which is just a learned social stereotype. It can be unintentional, but for sure, I think it is deeply ingrained in one's being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And it's a deep thing, Christopher. It's a really deep thing. Unconscious bias is a really deep thing because it's like so in us, right? I've had white people say to me, like, Dr. Verna, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. How can you say I'm racist? And then I have to look at them and say, well, let's take a look at your history. Let's take a look at your people. Let's take a look at the systems. And then let's take a look at maybe what you were taught. And without even knowing it, you were taught. And so now you get to get back to that work. You get to go inside of you and figure out what is your racism story. And there's a racism story that's actually happening right in the hallways of corporations. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think it's conversations like this that allow leaders to say, if they can have this conversation in public, we can have it at our organization. And in a lot of these organizations, it's what Christopher said is it's that unconscious bias. I think there's a lot of people that do not have malintent. There are people who do. I think it's, to be honest, laziness. Because I hear a lot from corporations like, well, we don't get enough diverse applicants. They don't apply for our jobs. I just think that's lazy. We don't go out and try to find them, right? We might work with a MACV and a great vendor or a veteran organization, and we want to employ, like, we go search them out, right? But most organizations don't have programs. We wait for them to come to us. We don't make it an open, invitation, and we don't try to find the diversity. And so part of that's just being lazy, is we don't want to take that step into it, but we want to use it as an excuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And comfort too, Jamie. Comfort.
Right.
Comfort. Yeah.
We want to be comfortable. And we don't want to feel uncomfortable. And you connect lazy with, like, and I would say maybe there's another word, is that it's just more efficient. It's more efficient to reach into your very closest network.
Right.
And say, well, we need to hire. So we're going to hire someone who we know, who we're comfortable with. And unfortunately, as human beings, guess what? We tend to be comfortable with people who look like us.
Yeah.
Naturally, without even realizing it, we tend to be comfortable. And so then we reach into our comfort levels. So the question then becomes, like, how do we extend and with intention beyond our comfort levels?
Yeah. I think I just want to add on to that point, and I want to make the point. You said, where does it, how does it show up at times? And I think as kind of business leaders, when you're running a company or you're involved in a company, there are periodically, not often, but periodically there are overt signs of racism. But in my mind and my experience, they're relatively easy to address. If it's an overt sign, if it's something that has actually happened, and I've had a number of those in a long career. The issue is what I think Jamie's talking about, which is the subtleness of things that go on within a company, and hiring and promotion is clearly one of those types of very subtle forms that creeps into a company. And I know we probably aren't moving to solutions at this point, but I do think Jamie called it's laziness, and I think that's true. I think that's part of it is it's laziness. I also think it needs dedicated effort by leadership to start to address some of these things, and that's how it starts to get addressed, because rarely is it intention. I find, sometimes it may be, but more times than not, it's lack of education or lack of a discipline around how to address this, which means education is an important element.
Right. No, that's great. Anyone else? We just have a few minutes before a break here. Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to say too, Jim, I just agree with what you said, and it shows up unconsciously. Racism it's such a big component of how we were raised or socialized when we were young. And so what we've learned by opening up these discussions and conversations in our salons is that there are conversations just in passing in a staff room that can be racist without anyone having any intentions to hurt anyone. And it's just that consciousness level of not understanding what they're expressing. And so really making sure that you're creating that safe space for employees to learn and understand what racism is, so that they can really learn what their words mean.
Yeah. And what I love about what you all are saying is that you're talking about executive leadership is what you're talking about.
Sure.
You're talking about that work happening at the executive levels of your organization. And when that happens, something else happens, like you said, Jim, in the culture where people,
that's right,
I think that they feel safer to actually address these things. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, can I just play off of that one, because I think you're exactly right. I'll give you a perfect example. I led an organization. I'll make it short, but I led an organization where I was going over the HR review of the organization. So within that, there's a kind of a demographic profile of kind of where we are, et cetera. And I had just taken over the organization, and I was making the point in the presentation that, well, we haven't made much progress. But this was about 10 years ago, and I said, I started rationalizing why we hadn't made progress. And a woman who was my boss at the time looked at me and she said, Jim, she said, expect what you accept. And I said, well, yeah, I kind of get that. But, then I went on to my rationalization again, and she stopped me a second time and said, Jim, expect what you accept. And it was that second time that I recognized her message, which was, as a leader of an organization, if you expect a diverse organization, it will happen. If you accept your lack of diversity, it won't happen. You'll get what you expect. So I thought that was a great lesson to exactly the point you were making.
Wow, that's great. Mike, go for it.
This time I know we have a timeout, okay?
I'm sorry.
I'm watching the screen. They're saying you got to be out at 59. We will return. We're on Facebook. You listen to us on WCCO radio, in the room where it happens. Conversations tonight. The topic: racism in the workplace. Stay with us. Plenty more to come on the other side. Welcome back. Our conversation continues in the room where it happens. Conversations tonight, racism in the workplace. Dr. Verna Price and his team panel with us. I'm going to open this discussion with a question, Dr. Price, and take it. And I think, again, this is where we get back to confusion amongst employees. A guy said to me, this was a little while back, and he said he snapped at someone that was African American when they told him what to do. They were not his boss. It was just somebody that thought they were doing their job poorly, and they said, you need to do it this way, and he snapped back at him. And he was afraid, because he was afraid that it would come across as the way that he retorted as racism. And I stopped him and I said, I've known you for X amount of years. That's the way you react to everybody that tries to tell you what to do. So reversing what we were talking about earlier, he felt like his reaction was racist. I said, I don't know if it was or not, but this is the way you react to anybody that tells you what to do. It is your personality trait. How do you know if you're acting on a racist bias or if it's something else, if it's a control factor, if it's something? How do we know what's going on inside us sometimes is a question I think all of us struggle with.
That's a really good question. Really good question. And it happens a lot. So then if I were coaching you, I'd say something like, if this happened with another employee that was a white employee, would you respond the same way?
And that was my point, because I'd seen him respond the exact same way to other employees like that. He just doesn't like to be controlled or have anybody tell him what to do, you know?
Exactly. And then here's the other question. So it's really about kind of motivation. Like what is it that's motivating you to respond to that? So if there's difference in response, if this person, that's just how they react, that's just how they react, then, but if there's difference, so if just like within the next half hour or so, someone else does the very same thing, but except, instead of snapping at them, you say, you know what, here's a better way to do that. Then you start having differentiated behavior. And when you start having differentiated behavior, you have to ask the question, what is going on? What is happening? Why is this person being treated like this versus that? The January 6th insurrection, I was just on a webinar today talking about, how we can talk about racism with each other. And someone said, it was amazing that here it is that this group of people, white men, had stormed the Capitol and they were being escorted out as if they were there for a field trip. Versus if this were a group of people of color, African-American people in particular, would that have been the same treatment? So the question becomes differentiated treatment. I think in this work, though, Mike, because there has been such differentiated treatment historically in workplaces, then when you start to have the conversations, people get really uneasy about it. And people have to get to that uneasy, uncomfortable place for that conversation to start and for that conversation to get to the place where it's productive. And you can get now new strategies on how to create a culture and how to create an environment where everyone gets treated with some level of equity, right? As we were on our break, I thought to myself in bringing our guest back on, in your, and Mike, you just did this for me, which is great. In your own personal experience, when have you seen racism in the workplace? And, what are your thoughts about that? And what did you do? What did you do, if anything? Or maybe in retrospect, you now realize that you saw it. And what would you do now if you were in that same situation? So I'm going to open that up as a question, because I think a lot of people are in that situation right now.
I've been in a suit and tie professional office environment my entire career since my early 20s. And it's hard to see it sometimes. I don't know that it's as prevalent. It's a little bit more of a straight lace, proper kind of atmosphere, business environment. And sometimes it can be really difficult to see some of these things. They can be extremely subtle. But, you may hear a little comment that someone makes. I think the example I can think of is a manager who seemed to be kind of short, kind of curt, impatient with employees that were of color, and seemed to take a little bit more time, be more understanding, more flexible with white employees. And depending on where you're at in sort of the corporate ranking there, You know, it can be really challenging of how to approach that and how to have that conversation, because you certainly don't want to be accusatory. You don't want to get yourself in trouble for making an accusation. And it's hard to know where those boundaries are, where those lines are.
That is hard, Christopher. I mean, that's really, it's a balancing line. And that really is where your executive leadership comes in, don't you think? Because if they have created an environment, a workplace where you can have that conversation and say to whoever it is, you know, I'm just noticing something and I'm wondering whether or not you're aware of it.
Right.
Right? Do you even understand what you are doing and how that may be impacting the work environment?
And others see it and they pick up on these things. They may not say anything, they may not complain, but it certainly goes, you know, it is noticed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you go home and you think to yourself, all right, you know, what just happened today?
Yeah.
You know, and then who do you talk to about this? You know, what I'm hoping out of these conversations is I am hoping that that at least you could talk about it without feeling like you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're going to lose your job, which means losing your livelihood, it's putting yourself on the line to be able to say there needs to be some equality here. Absolutely. Absolutely. These are great conversations. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break here in a minute. And what I'd like to do is get another example or two from our other guest on your personal, when you have seen this in your workplace and what you've done. Mike?
Racism is in the workplace, in the room where it's happening, with Dr. Verna Price and the esteemed panel. More on just that and plenty more conversations, and you can give us a question anytime through our text line. You're watching us on Facebook, but you're listening to us on News Talk 830 WCCO. Back in the room where it happens, conversations on racism that matter with Dr. Verna Price. The topic tonight, racism in the workplace. Dr. Price, we heard from one panelist, but there are many more to hear from on this very topic.
Absolutely. So we're going to just get right to it. And I'm going to have Miss Kristen go ahead and tell us that story.
I will. I have worked in the beauty industry and the salon industry for most of my career. And so I've seen racism show up the entire time. And in Dr. Verna, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, where churches and the cosmetology industry and salons are very similar. It's very segregated. And so what I've observed is stylists really hesitant and really nervous about doing various hair textures. And so I've seen artists refuse to work with people of color, and it just really it's a big part of the industry that we need to change. Mm-hmm. And so it's something that I'm really proud and celebrating with Jute as being a part of pioneering this and changing this, because that nervousness and hesitation just comes down to fundamental training and touching hair textures and the fabric of hair and serving all people of color.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent. That's a great example. Jim, you had an example as well.
I do, and similar to Chris, I've been in, mostly a professional organizations that you don't really see it that often, but once in a while you'll see an overt example. And I remember years ago having an African-American manager guy work for me, and we went on a golf outing, and we were in the South, and as we pulled up to the golf course, we were told that he wasn't allowed to play, and it kind of took us all back, because there was a group of us, and we actually all just kind of turned around and said, well, if he can't, we don't. And, we kind of we left. But that isn't very often. I mean, it's an example from a long time ago. What I find is probably more prevalent are these things that we talked about and we're seeing and talking a little bit about. And that's these really subtle ways that it comes about. And I find my example with subtleness is around the hiring and promotional opportunities for people of color. And, I've heard for long periods of time that, well, we just, we can't find the right person. We can't, they're not applying, et cetera, and all of that is, again, it goes back to what you'll accept. And what I found was very effective is mandating as a leader, that not so much a quota system where you have to have so many people of each, ethnic diversity, but that every slate that you hire, every time you hire, you are obligated to make sure that you have diverse representation in that slate of people. If it's 2 or 3 or 4 people, they have to have diversity. So that's where, because you made the point, I think, earlier when I was having my technical problems, that people tend to hire in their own image. And, so white managers tend to hire in their own image. And you really need to break the cycle and demand that it go a different way.
But that's not always popular, Jim.
No, it's not popular. No, but I go back to my point earlier about cultures and the relationship to performance. And the biggest insight that I got a number of years ago was that diverse organizations actually have higher levels of performance. And there is real study that says that that's the case. The business case for diversity is very strong. And if you ground it in the business case for diversity, you get people to come along because they understand it's better, it's in their self-interest.
Absolutely. And that self-interest, we can talk about that, right? Like what is in your self-interest? Because the bottom line is that, business is designed for profit.
Right.
So you have to make money.
Right.
But in the same time, that business case for diversity is clearly there. And so the question becomes then, why is it that we know the research says, we know that the case has been made and is there. So the work of it, then that's where it becomes difficult, right?
Right.
Like the individual work of it comes right home to you. Jamie, what do you, I know you see a lot of different organizations, so I just love your perspective.
Oh, she needs to unmute.
Are you on mute, Jamie? There we go.
We work with a lot of diverse businesses in our company now, but even in my corporate career, I think back now, and I think that's the awakening I talked about earlier, is I didn't even realize the subtlety of what was happening. But in my mid-20s, in a large corporate environment, I was asked to lead recruiting for North Carolina A&T, which is a historically Black college. And so I went down there, I traveled, I loved the campus, just meeting people. And after a couple of trips, I was approached by HR to say, we're not seeing the numbers. Like we need more numbers from North Carolina A&T. And I thought, well, I'm having great conversations. Like I think people are interested, but I'm asking people in the South to move to Minneapolis where it goes, and right, it's a hard sell. And the pressure got mounted and mounted. And I started finding out that other recruiters and other universities didn't have the numbers. They didn't have quotas that they had to meet. And because I was a historically Black college trying to recruit. And so they started to tell me, like, just what do you need to tell them? Get them here, right? Just try. And it was the first time where I'm in my mid-20s trying to make a career and thinking, I'm not going to lie to these people about how diverse we're not in this organization, right? It was like I was being fed kind of a script of what they wanted me to tell them because we had to hit a number, as Jim said, right? And we weren't looking at the person when I couldn't look past the person. And that's all I was focused on. And so I remember some of those subtleties. And then when we had interns, I was the one that always invited them to my house for a holiday when they couldn't go home, right, over the summer. And I would get comments about like why I was doing that. And it was just so strange to me because I wasn't raised that way. And it's that subtlety of like, you see it kind of smack in your face. Like, I don't even know why this is even something we're talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And these are people who you thought to yourself, you know, aren't you educated? Don't you have a master's degree in business marketing, wah, wah, wah? And,
Right.
and here you are asking me, why would I invite, you know, these interns who are clearly, you know, new here, clearly have no family, nowhere to go, and
Right.
why I would invite them to my house for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then you realize, Jamie, that, you know, how many white people literally have never had a person of color to their house.
Right.
That was the comment.
Right.
What is, I can't imagine my family wouldn't know. And I was like, what? Or it's just, I think there's a lot of us that just don't understand that because we see the human.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the awakening that's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments? Jim, you had some thoughts.
I do. I just want to comment on the thing that Jamie said, because I just remember a situation, again, years ago. I was in a seminar, 20 plus years ago, where we were talking about race relations as part of the workshop. And I remember the guy who was leading it said to me, as a young manager, a young leader, he said, "Do you have a diverse staff?" I said, "I do. I've got, an African-American guy on my staff." And he said, "That's great." He said, "Do you socialize with him? Do you include him into when you're socializing as a team?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "Oh, that's good." He said, do you always have him at your restaurant, at your bar, at your place?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We do." I said, "We always include him." He said, "That's great." He said, "Do you ever go to his place?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Do you ever go to his bar? Do you go to his restaurant? Do you go to where he lives? Do you ever understand it from his perspective?" And I said, "That's really interesting." I said, "I hadn't really thought about it." I said, "I hadn't thought about it." I said, "I thought inclusion was including him with me. But what I didn't realize was what he was asking me to do was understand my African-American manager in what he lives in and where he associates. And that's when you really get a better understanding of somebody." So I thought it was really interesting. It was a little bit to Jamie's point about asking people to, break out and start talking to each other in their real worlds, because that's where understanding comes from.
And as we go to break here, Jim, also what's happening in that scenario is a power dynamic, right?
Yes, for
So
sure.
as long as you're the person inviting, you are still in a power dynamic, and that construct, that racism construct, still prevails.
Yeah.
Right. So you're the manager, you've got the power, you invite them, and what are they going to say? Are they going to say no?
No.
Of course they're not going to say no, because why? This is their job. You're their manager. But then to be able to say, well, how about you? I'd love to come in, whatever, hang out or go to your church or, come to your whatever, right? So to be able to switch roles, that's great. That's great. Thank you. We're going to come back up and start talking about some strategies. Thank you.
Some strategies in the room where it happens, conversations on racism that matter, conversations in the workplace specifically tonight. You're listening to us on News Talk 830 WCCO and watching us on Facebook. Stay with us. Backgrounds that decided they were going to protect themselves and not rely on law enforcement. The question that I had that came out of that I've repeated now continuously and is paramount, I think, to our conversation is what I saw in these people was a very different but a just as passionate American dream as I have. Now, theirs was their business, and they had come here, some of them first immigrants that had come over, and they thought this was the greatest place in the world, even if it was a small business on the corner that you might look at and say, well, that doesn't seem like it's very profitable. To them, it was everything. Their passion for the American dream was the exact same as mine. They just had a different venue, and they were just as passionate about defending it. And I've found that since then, when you ask the question inside a corporation or when you intermix with people of other races, that question, what is your definition of the American dream, is incredibly important because it varies so much and it reinforces that we are all in this together because we all share some kind of a dream and some kind of thing that we believe in. And I find it to be incredibly powerful when you ask that question to a fellow employee or anybody else.
Oh, that's great. That's great, Mike. And in our when I kind of help people think about how to have those conversations, there's like a series of questions that I provide you with, and there's some starter questions in having a conversation, and that is a great starter question. You know, what is your definition of the American dream? What does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? How does that, you know, how do you own that? How do you own the American dream in building your business, in making your business an equitable place? What does that really mean to you? So just being able to hear people's stories and people's perspectives around that is very, very important. You know, what we're doing here tonight is we're demonstrating to the business world that we can have this conversation. We don't have to be mean. We don't have to be vicious. We don't have to be angry. What we have to be is strategic and be, because our businesses, they need help in this area. And they need help on a couple of fronts, Mike, I think. One is how to be authentic, how to do this authentically. Two is how to make this a critical part of their of everything that they do. So in other words, it's weaved into the very fiber of how the organization works. So that big question of how do you make your businesses and your workplaces equitable? So I'm going to bring our panel back and have us to start. Actually, I'm going to start with Jamie because, you know, you've seen so many different workplaces, you know, as a strategic consultant, like, what do you tell them? Like how, because that's really what they want to know. Like, how do I do this, Dr. Verna? Mm-hmm.
Right. And I equate it to what Jim said earlier about culture. We do a ton of culture work and it's the same thing. It's like, it's this intangible, like, how do we get better at it? And it takes work. The first thing we tell all of our clients, and a lot of our clients called us last May, and what do we do? How do we talk about this? And you use the word authenticity, is be authentic first. If you don't know yet, don't say that you do, right? Or you have to be really clear on that, but ask better questions is what we tell all of our clients, is in any situation, is whose voice is missing from this conversation or who isn't represented, right? We have to start asking different questions in our organizations. We would do it if, you know, their sales were down. We would do it if something else was going on in our business, and we have to do it around this. And so simply what we've told companies, especially the small and mid-market companies that we work with, is you have to define for your people what diversity means for your organization. You have to define how you promote it, right? And you have to take actions and tell them what you're doing to further that promotion. It only happens if you take the action. And your employees are only going to believe you if you do that. So it's getting curious and knowing that there's a better way than what you're doing today.
You know, Jamie, so I got this call actually from a very, very, very talented African-American woman. I mean, this woman has so many degrees. It's amazing. And this, you know, big time company, you know, went after her to recruit her. And so they recruit her. And here she is in this huge company. And she's the only one. She's the only person of color. And she calls me like in a late evening time where typically she wouldn't call me. And she said, you know, can I talk to you? And, you know, and of course, I knew right away that something is wrong. You know, something's going on here. And then she proceeds to tell me that she's really struggling in this company and that they went to like all these great, you know, lengths to get her and recruit her. But now it's like they're trying to get rid of her. You know, and one of the first things I said to her is, well, who are your allies? Who believes in you? Because when you talked about take action, you know, define what you want. and how are you going to promote that and, take action? Like, who's going to take action on your behalf to say, this person is here and we're going to make sure she stays here and we're going to help her and coach her, however it might be. Anyway, that's what that made me think of. Yeah.
Even more important than she's here is we need her voice.
That's good.
We need her experience. I mean, you guys, that's what diversity is about. It's not about the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. It's about your diverse background and your lens that you look at the world through. And as an organization, any business, they need to have all of those perspectives. It's what innovation is. It's the definition.
Yeah.
So what companies don't realize is they're missing an opportunity to harness the power of something that could be a competitive advantage.
Yeah. I totally agree. Christopher, what do you think?
Yeah, that was excellent. I liked what Jamie had to say there. I especially with larger employers, really I think having it from the top down, having the leaders making sure that this is an important priority, that they are allocating meaningful resources, human resources, financial resources. They're creating meaningful budgets. And that can take on a variety of different forms depending on the culture of that particular company. But I think it has to take kind of center stage oftentimes, and not just be something that is discussed annually as if they're checking the box that we talked about it this year, but that it's an everyday occurrence and it's an everyday message and communication. And you can see it throughout the entire organization at all the different levels of the organization.
Yeah. I love that you can really, what you're saying, Christopher, is that it becomes normal.
Yeah, right.
It's normal. It's normal to see a multi-ethnic organization. It's normal to see multicultural. It's normal to see multi-perspectives. It's normal. It's just who we are, right? It just becomes, it's every day. I love that. Kristen, what do you think?
I think it's really important when you talk about the leaders at the top that, again, I'm going to go back to vulnerability, and understanding that you are going to learn alongside your team and to be okay with that. I think secondly, what we've learned is that really putting the diversity and equity training, binders or platforms to the side and spending time and resources on the conversation and creating the space and the culture where everyone can have the conversations. And we ask those basic questions that you were talking about of what does racism mean to you? How have you experienced it? And what I've seen with my very eyes is just an immense amount of honesty, emotions. And so that is healing for individuals, but it's creating this culture of trust and a space where people can share and learn from one another. And I think we wouldn't be where we are today without reaching out to all of our employees and taking surveys and understanding who's interested and who's passionate about the different topics within racism and creating a better environment and imagining what will look like in the next year or two. And so I would just, drive home the importance of this. Your strategies and how you formulate comes from your team. And there's no hierarchy in this because everybody's walking side by side. And I've learned some of the most profound stories and experiences, from new hires that are entry level. So it's really, really important to listen and to grow alongside.
And Kristen, that's a really good point that we hear a lot in our leadership trainings too, is that leaders feel like they need to provide the solution when really what you're saying is they need to provide the space.
Yeah.
We do not always have to have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we stifle the conversation because we feel like we need to solve it for everybody. And I love that you guys are doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you also use the word healing too. right? Normalizing the word racism, particularly with white people, it's a big deal because, I mean, your typical white person does not talk about racism. It just never comes up, right? Partly because you don't have to, because you're in the construct that says you don't really need to. You never really need to deal with it. But partly because you've just never learned how to. So to be able to, and within that construct, there's a lot of healing to be done. Particularly, where you have spaces and places where those unconscious biases, those, that quiet, racism that's kind of underneath, that kind of raises up and hurts people. I mean, there's a lot of pain in organizations as a result of racism. And to be able to start that healing through your conversations, and it's reconciliation almost, right? To be able to do that work. Jim, you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot of big companies. You sent me your resume, and I was like, whoa. I told my husband, I'm like, whoa.
It's not that impressive. But thank you.
Yeah, I was reading it. My eyes were like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot. But so what are some of your thoughts?
Well, actually, I was just going to say, I think Chris and Kristen and Jamie have all hit on various aspects that I think of that are really important for how you do this. And I think you've hit on a number of them, but I think it's education, it's leadership, and it's accountability. And you said something earlier, Dr. Price, about education and somebody that was well educated academically, that may have had a master's or maybe even a PhD. But this is a different kind of education, isn't it? When you're talking about issues of race and how to understand, it really requires a very deliberate conversation. And this is, I think, where Kristen was going a second ago about really listening, really understanding, and pushing for that, because it doesn't necessarily come from a book per se or from a master's degree. It comes from life experiences that really make a big deal of difference. And I also believe in the power of leadership. Leadership sets the tone. I think Chris said that early on in this conversation. Leadership sets the tone. And if they set it appropriately, you start to see it, permeate throughout any particular organization. And the last point that I make is around accountability, putting systems in place to actually hold the organization accountable. And it doesn't mean always on the negative side. It means reward for those places that take this issue and this opportunity seriously and promote it. Reward those parts of your organization. But those that don't, and where you see either subtle or overt forms, it's holding that accountable and doing it quickly and effectively is really another key here. So it goes back to Jamie's point about cultures. It's you know it when you see it, and if you don't see it, it doesn't matter what words are on the board. If you don't see it and you don't feel it and you don't hear people talk about it, then it's not happening. Racism will sit underneath that if it's not actually brought out. So that's at least my feeling on it.
Yeah,
I have a question for everybody on the panel as they've gone through this. We saw the Me Too movement. We've seen strides made in gay pride and gay marriage and things like that. How is sexism, racism, and maybe homophobia, how is that interrelated? Are they one and the same? Do we learn anything from one that relates to the other? Are they all categorically in the same kind of a pot as the way you deal with it and managers, or are they completely different?
Yeah. Well, you know what, Mike, this is interesting. And one of the reasons many years ago, I stopped doing diversity work for a couple of reasons. One is that it was just easier for people to deal with the other isms, but nobody wanted to deal with the core, which was racism. So if you take a look at all inequality that exists in our society, the anchor of it is racism. It's the anchor. So someone can say, well, you don't like me because I don't make enough, I'm in lower class. But the truth of the matter is that you could be lower class and go to a grocery store, but still have a white skin. And I can have a PhD, go to the same grocery store with black skin, and you're going to be treated better than me. Why? Because at the core, the root. And so I decided, literally, I made a decision. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to the core. Because if I get to the core, what will happen is that we can better address all of the other things that are happening. But until then, what we do is we cover it up. We just simply cover it up. You can be a white man with all sorts of things going on that you get to cover up because you're a white man.
Yeah.
And what shows up is that you're a white man. And that white man takes precedence in this construct of racism, no matter what all the other things are going on. So that's, and then the other reason why I stopped doing diversity work is because the only time I would get called for projects was in February. February, Mike. February.
Really?
Do you know
Black
why?
History Month.
Do you know why? Do you know why,
Day,
Mike?
huh?
Tell me why. Tell me why. Huh? It's Black History Month. It's the Black Folks Month. So, give her a little job because she's a black lady who knows how to talk.
Then, Dr. Price,
So I stopped.
in this media, you will see a number of stories done, particularly this February in Black History Month, on
Particularly, yeah.
the African American community. Are you offended by that? That we take this month and we say, "Oh boy, we better make sure."
No, it's not offense at all, Mike. But what it is that we have to look at the reality of why do we even come to this place of having that month? Because the truth of the matter is that all history is African American history. That this society would not exist without the African American experience. Mm-hmm. The same Capitol that was stormed by angry white supremacist men is the same Capitol that was built by African American slaves. Mm-hmm. We're like this. You're like Mike. You're like my peeps. You know what I mean? We're like all in it. Let me stop because I'm just like going on.
No, but I just want to come back to your original point that many isms start with racism, and I think that's a very powerful construct for especially predominantly white organizations to understand. It's not, it may take some longer than others to understand that, but your point is a really powerful one, and I think it's one that we need to keep talking about.
And we need to
ask you guys one more. Anybody jump in on this? Because I had this conversation with an African American coach recently. He said an African American coach wasn't getting hired, and he thought it was because of race. And he said the truth is he's not good enough. Now, if you're at work and you see somebody that's African American and they think that they're not getting promoted because of their race, and you think it's because they're not ready for that promotion, they're not good enough. I'll start with you, Dr. Price. Should you tell them that?
Of course you should. Why wouldn't you? Would you tell the white
guy? Because we're scared that it's going to be perceived as being racist if we say it. That's why.
But would you have that strategic conversation with the white man and say, you just didn't make it. You didn't make the cut. You didn't make the cut. But why wouldn't you? Be honest. Go ahead, Jamie.
Here's the fundamental.
They're going to kick us off of Facebook in a minute. Go ahead.
My soapbox is, right, we do a lot of HR consulting and any color. We have so many leaders who can't have those kind of conversations before they need to have them, that you're not growing or you're not ready for the next role. And it doesn't matter who the person is, we need to be able to have that conversation with them. We need to not make it a black and white thing on that. We need to have had that conversation with that coach to let him know what he needed to do to get that next position. And it doesn't matter. Leaders don't know how to have those difficult conversations, whether it's around this topic or other things. And that goes back to Jim's point about training and education and teaching them how to do hard things, right? How to have hard conversations early, not when you're at that point.
That's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kristen, you're over there. You're nodding your head, but I know you have a thought. I see it.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts. I think what, your question sparked for me is that, this topic of racism, what I've seen happen in these conversations in the opening up of our employees is that then they start to talk about sexuality. They start to talk about other issues. And so when you go deep, as you say, Dr. Verna, then naturally these other conversations are going to start.
Absolutely. You know what? You are in the room where it happens, and it was happening tonight. And I just thank you all so much for coming. Take this message to your business leaders, to your organizations. And I hope that we help someone tonight. I really do. That maybe tomorrow someone will start just boldly stepping up, some executive. So you know what? It's time for us to start, because we did it last night on Facebook with Dr. Verna in the room where it happens. And Mike Max and Dr. Verna just worked it out. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining me at the co-host tonight.
If you're out in the corporate world, thank you. Esteemed fans, very interesting hour and a half. On the other side, Bob Moskowitz joined me and Leah Bergen. You've been watching or listening to important conversations in the room with Dr. Verna Price. When we come back, Hockey Talk. Stay with us on News Talk 830 WCCO.